Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced at North Idaho College on the shores of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guest.
I am most pleased to welcome you to a two-part series, both this week and next week, of travels through the southern part of the continent of Africa, with special attention to the Union of South Africa, but also some countries that border to the north. We're very pleased to have a very special friend as our guest, and she and her spouse travel around the world. And on this particular trip, they were gone for a month, and so they got some great insights to that part of the world. I welcome to the program Lorraine Landwehr. She's a certified public accountant in Idaho. And may I take the opportunity and privilege to say that she also has been extremely generous in working with the financial accounts of our human rights organizations. And Lorraine, we thank you for all the work you do that, and you do many other community projects too. So welcome to the program, and thank you for bringing these remarkable photographs that we'll be using during the show. And I'm so pleased to have our two regular panelists, Janelle Burke, who's an attorney in the state of Idaho, and next to her is Erna Reinhardt, who is Director of Public Relations at North Idaho College. And as to tradition, Janelle will commence today's questioning.
Lorraine, this is a wonderful trip, and it's been billed as a trip to southern Africa. Where in the world did you go?
Well, actually, we went to two countries. We went to Zimbabwe, and then we went to the country of South Africa. And so you have to, I guess, envision the continent and think of how you have this rounded bottom of the continent of Africa. And that's where we were. Cape Town is right on the coast on the Atlantic Ocean, and we rented a car at that point, and we drove.
And you set off. and you had maps, of course.
Oh, yes.
And how much planning had you done before you went as to what you were going to do?
Not much. For one thing, we were very busy, and we were working right up until the 11th hour. So we didn't have a lot of planning, and we had our airfare organized. And I will tell you quickly that one thing that you want to think about when you're traveling to that part of the world from the Pacific Northwest, it's really quite easy to get on a nonstop plane from Seattle to London. Take a break for a day or two in London, and then it's south to go from London to, you'd fly into Johannesburg probably, that's what we did. But it's only 2-hour time difference, and so it's a long flight, but you don't have a terrible jet lag when you do it that way.
Thank you.
Erna Reinhardt.
Hi, Lorraine. Welcome to the show.
Thanks.
Let's just talk about your first day. What your first perceptions were, your first impressions. Where did you land? And tell us about how you got acclimated to the new country that you were in.
Okay, we landed in Johannesburg, and one thing I had done in terms of planning is I knew we would immediately need a place to go. And we had to have a place to stay after a long trip like that. And I found a wonderful guest house, Emerald Guest House was the name, near the airport. And I found them on the internet. And what they did is just came to the airport and collected us and took us bag and baggage to their wonderful little guest house. And they were very helpful. They helped us organize a car. They said, before you do that, perhaps you'd like to do some other things. We had a few ideas of our own. And we just talked about it that evening. The very next day, we completely changed what we thought we wanted to do and got on a plane and flew to Zimbabwe to go see Victoria Falls, which is considered one of the 7 wonders of the world. And so we decided that we cannot get this close and not go to see this place. So.
And let me follow up with that. Tell us a little bit about the languages and were there any language barriers?
No, everybody speaks English.
Awesome, great.
When we do these kind of shows and travel logs, I call them, are very popular with our viewers. We always want to take our viewers on the trip through slides or through photographs. And I know, Lorraine, in that month you were there, you had hundreds of slides, and you put them on very, very good equipment. And so we went and sat down and went through hundreds of them, and we picked 15 for this show. And we're going to have our staff to put those up, and you have a monitor there, and we'll start now with going through where you were.
This was in Zimbabwe. When we first arrived, we literally just got into a taxi, and he took us to a hotel, and there happened to be this little outdoor marketplace across the road from our hotel. And so it was interesting. You can see where they have done some carvings, and there's a lot of natural materials used for various kinds of craft work and that sort of thing. And you see these little marketplaces everywhere.
It's such a powerful way of demonstrating what it was like and how much pleasure you had. And here is a breathtaking visit you had to the site that you talked about earlier.
Victoria Falls. And this photo is deceiving because actually you're only seeing a very small part of the waterfalls. It takes at least an hour to walk the path that is the length of the falls. So considering that it would take an hour to walk the length, you can imagine what a small portion of it you're actually seeing in this photo.
And there's a lot of, from the water coming up, a lot of haze and all. But it's really gorgeous.
And this is a baboon sitting in the tree, eating some leaves on the edge of the fall, taking a look at us. And we had to have a look at him, of course.
Very peaceful looking.
Now, this is not too far from the falls, also in Zimbabwe, but you can see, because you're away from that spray from the waterfall, how dry this country really is.
Yep.
And it's like this.
The majority of the country is really dry rather
Yes.
than plush and green like what we showed earlier.
The plush and green is just because of that mist that's coming off the waterfalls 24 hours a day. But
And this is where someone
typical-
lives.
This is a typical house
Okay.
for the local people.
And this is an overview of a city.
Well, after we left the falls, we flew to Johannesburg, spent one night in our guest house, and then the next day flew to Cape Town. Cape Town is down in the southern, well, I guess you would say the southwest corner of the continent and in South Africa.
And this is Cape Town.
This is Cape Town. And it was at this point then that we didn't want to take the time to drive from Johannesburg to Cape Town because there's not much between there. It's rather deserty. So it was at this point we decided to rent the car and then just take off on our own. And this is it's like a cable car that you can take to the top of Table Mountain and then look down over the city.
And you were taking the photograph from up there.
Yes. This is South Africa's entry into the next America's Cup. We took a little tour of the harbor, and this sailboat was tied to one of the piers.
And that's a really big event for a lot of countries, including the United States.
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
And the seals and sea lions live in the harbor. They're harbor seals. And, of course, these tires are used as bumpers for boats, and the seals nap in the tires.
Those are quite large tires. That wouldn't fit an ordinary car.
No. And this is a park in the city. There's lots of green space, and I think it reminds me of large cities anywhere. For example, New York City has its Central Park. San Francisco has its Golden Gate Park. And in the heart of Cape Town was this lovely...
As you traveled around South Africa, there were a lot of parks, weren't there? A lot of beautiful parks.
Actually, South Africa is a very beautiful country. This is cute because the kids have the choice of whether or not to wear shoes to school. And the rule is, however, if you wear your shoes in the morning, you must leave your shoes on all day. So these kids were out it was like a lunch break or something, and they were on the edge of this park right across the street from the school, and you can see that as they're standing there that some of them are wearing shoes and some of them are not.
That's really interesting. And the next one here is...
We went on to out of the city on a day trip, and this was just a little community on the edge of a bay, and the local people, as you can see, are just working on their crafts. And just about everywhere you go, you see somebody sitting around working on their crafts and, of course, selling their product.
So there's a lot of choices to buy the different products they have.
A lot of masks and drums and whatnot. This is the Cape. This is what South Africa is famous for being at the end of the continent, the southern end. And at this Cape, you see the signs that say how many kilometers to the South Pole or how many kilometers
I saw some of your
to
slides,
Paris.
and I thought, is it really close? And with humor, and you said, no, it's quite a distance.
It's very far. This is cute. These are penguins. This is not too far from the Cape. This is interesting. Apparently, this is just a small town in an ordinary neighborhood with houses that go right down to the edge of the water. And apparently, some years ago, the penguins arrived on this little beach and decided to stay. They've been there for all of this time. So a little bit at a time, the National Park Service started buying up the property and made a place that's now permanent for these penguins. And some of the photos, you won't see one here, but some of the photos you can see that there's houses and there's this empty space where all the penguins are, and then there's more houses. And so you park your car, walk down through an ordinary neighborhood, and then you come to a gate and pay a fee and you walk in there to see the penguins.
It's just a great story, isn't it?
It's funny how they just decided to never leave. This is an example of out in the countryside when you get away from the cities. This is a beautiful home, a farm. This is actually a vineyard. South Africa, particularly toward the western part of the country, is famous for its vineyards. You see lots of agriculture. They grow just everything. There's orange groves and all kinds of fruits and vegetables. It's a very Mediterranean climate.
Yeah, the climate really makes that possible.
Right. But then on the other hand, you can see how people live as well. It's not, there's a lot of obvious disparity between the wealthy and the poor. And it's very apparent everywhere you drive.
Now, this is very poor living
This is
conditions.
a township. This is just a sort of the side of one. And the people are all very friendly, and we were always very comfortable. And they were always smiling and happy, would help you do anything.
Sure. And I think we have a final one that shows, again, one of the areas of poverty.
And they were just milling around and talking it over. But they've lived this way for a long time, and this is very, very typical.
Well, thank you very much, Lorraine, for bringing those. In next week's show, we'll have another set of other parts of the area that you visited. And I just appreciate the fact that our viewers could see that. And we shall return to Janelle Burke.
My question will have to do with climate. What kind of a climate was there while you were there? Was it comfortable, or is there a great deal of humidity that makes it rather oppressive?
No, it was November, so because it's the opposite hemisphere, it would be late spring, early summer, and it would be very typical to the Mediterranean area of Europe. For example, southern France.
So you would have very nice, I suppose, balmy days, but not so warm that it's not difficult to walk around.
Exactly. In fact, we mostly wore sweaters or jackets in the evenings. And so it's not an oppressive tropical heat. However, it can be, like up in Zimbabwe where we saw those waterfalls, it was quite hot there. But I think a lot of that is obviously because it's away from the coast.
Mm-hmm. So as you go inland, it might get warmer. And you mentioned that you had sweaters and light jackets. What kinds of clothing would you recommend for a trip like this?
Well, there's one thing
clothing,
you have
of
to be
course.
conscious of is that when you're in cities, you just don't run around in your tank tops and your flip-flops. And so you want to always have some kind of a comfortable, easy to travel, maybe a sundress that you can put a sweater on over the top or whatever, and sandals, something, that's comfortable, but it's a little bit more formalized than just, for example, if you're going to be at the beach or at a resort. So that's what I always try to do, is have at least one or two things that would suit that. But a lot of our things were just very casual, just ordinary summer type attire that you would wear here. So I never had to buy anything special just to prepare for this trip.
Erna Reinhardt.
Lorraine, you mentioned a little bit about the agricultural businesses that you saw and that are there. Tell us a little bit about some of the other predominant industry or businesses that are both in South Africa and in Zimbabwe.
Mostly you see, well, the agriculture is very big. But the other thing is coal mining. There's quite a lot of coal mining, and there's a lot of coal-fired power plants. And I think, from what I could gather, that's probably the two biggest industries. Zimbabwe doesn't have much of anything. You wouldn't ever want to drive there on your own because you wouldn't find a place even to buy fuel for the car. It's very poor. It's a sad story where it didn't used to be that way until now they have a dictator who has taken over the country who is corrupt, quite simply. And so you have just a tremendous amount of poverty. It's the kind of place that would cause a revolution amongst the people because because of the fact that you have a few people living in, wealth that's beyond imagination. And then you have these poor people. So Zimbabwe is a totally different story than South Africa. South Africa is very developed. Every kid on the street has a cell phone attached to his ear.
Oh my gosh, just like here, just like here. How about tourism, though, for South Africa? Because the coastline looks absolutely gorgeous.
A lot
so
of
there
tourists.
must be some resorts and some smaller resorts. And
You get a little bit of everything. You have the nice little bed and breakfasts and country lodges and inns, and then you have the big, fabulous resort hotels on the beaches, just like you would, any nice beach anywhere. There's beautiful places. One that we stayed was in the city called Durban. Durban is more to the east on the Indian Ocean side, and it's actually quite a lot warmer there. It has something to do with these currents coming up, from Antarctica. And so as you get onto the Indian Ocean side, the water is warm. It's like Hawaii. You swim in the ocean, and the water temperature is the same as the air temperature, so it's wonderful.
great.
You and I have had some time to talk about this and going through the slides, so I have an advantage over the panel about some of the stories that you actually shared with us. You and your husband, when you take these tours and you go other places, you don't do these organized tours with 100 other people. You are too independent for that, like myself. I want you to share with our viewers, because someone will be traveling a place like that, and you mentioned where you landed and all those kind of things, but let's talk some about South Africa, the country, where by having an automobile and some of the stories, there's some delightful stories, and some of it can be next week too, but where that you, by driving on your own, the animals would cross the road, or you met this gentleman who took you all day on a trip. So share some of those stories about how people can, in going to countries and finding so many wonderful, friendly people, that you can really get to know the country and get to know the life of the people, that if you stay at a hotel and go down to the bar and drink, you're swell to stay home.
Well, first of all, let me just tell you a couple basic things. We had met some months before this trip. When we were in Mexico, we met a couple from Holland who had been to South Africa, and that's what got this started. They explained to us how easy it really was to do it on your own. And we didn't know that. But they said, this is just really just rent a car, and they have beautiful roads, it's easy, the people are friendly, and we said, okay. So there's that. And there's little things that I think we could talk about right now that we found out. For example, when we were leaving London on our British Airways flight, we each had like 1 or 2 pages left in our passports. As it turns out, if you don't have more than 1 page left in your passport, South Africa will not permit entry. And we did not know that. And so we were just fortunate, and they were telling us the story of a businessman who was going to a very important meeting in Johannesburg, and British Airways refused him, to enter the flight. And they called the embassy. They did everything to convince this man that they were not going to allow him in the country because there wasn't enough room in his passport for their visa stickers and their various stamps, and the passport has to have space for all of that, and they won't allow you entry. So that was something that I think anybody who's planning a trip wants to make sure they have plenty of space in their passport. And when we flew to Zimbabwe, this is interesting. We were talking about the corruption of the government there. You must have $30 US in cash to get in the country. It can't be euros. It can't be British pound sterling. It can't be South African rand. It cannot be even their own currency. It must be US dollars.
Or a credit card.
It cannot be a credit card. It must be $30 in cash per person. When you get off the plane, there's a guy right there behind a desk who takes the cash and stamps your passport.
We can imagine where some of those funds might go.
Speaking as an accountant, I don't even want to know.
You don't run your business that way. Another delightful thing is you're going across the country in South Africa, and you didn't even know for sure where you're going to stay each night and all. Just, in some places, a couple of places you're talking about, you don't want to go out driving because there's nowhere to get gas, but that was more like in the other country. But share with us about how you didn't plan 2 or 3 days ahead, and you could just enjoy each day, but you could still find a place to stay and all that. And there are also some parks where there's also places to stay, isn't there?
Yes, and actually, you probably wouldn't want to travel during a major holiday.
Right.
You know, we were getting awfully close to Christmas, and remember, it is summertime there at Christmas, and so the schools are out, and the local people are also taking vacations and traveling, and they have, it's kind of a European style where you take a whole month or two and go find a vacation rental somewhere at the beach, and we were just ahead of all of that, or we probably could have had some problems finding, you know, hotels, and once in a while we did, but people were so friendly. I remember one situation where it seemed like, oh my gosh, is everything in this town full? And we made the comment at a hotel desk where we were trying to check in and they were full, and he goes, oh no, and he just got on the phone and called a friend of his who had a B&B and gave us directions, and it's like that, you know, where everybody's so friendly and helpful. And so we just didn't know how long we were going to want to spend in one place. We didn't know in advance what it was going to be like. So we hated to make all these hotel reservations so far in advance and have all these commitments.
Tell a little about, too, you had some slides that we viewed where you were out, and I call it like a park, and they're little, I don't know what we call them, cabins or villages where you could stay there, too.
Well, there's quite an extensive national park service in South Africa, similar to what we have here in the United States, where we have our Yellowstone and Glacier National Park and those kinds of places. These national parks have lodging in the parks, which is sort of also similar to what we have. So it's kind of fun because you have a lot of choices. You can camp, or you can have an RV, or you can stay, you know, in a private little cabin. And some of these little cabins have an outdoor covered porch where the kitchen area is outside. In fact, we had a monkey raid our refrigerator.
You just got to tell that story, and then we'll go back to the panel. This is a great story.
So we were unloading our car, and we had odds and ends of things. And of course, because of this agriculture and this fabulous Mediterranean climate, there's just a lot of various, you know, like fruit and, you know, watermelon and peaches and bananas and oranges. It's just everything. And so it's tempting to stop at these roadside stands, so which we did frequently. So we were unloading the car. I went inside with the bags. I'd put some things in this outdoor refrigerator, and I heard this noise. I went back out, and there was this monkey sitting there on the rail eating a peach. And I thought, where did you get that? And I looked over, and the refrigerator door was wide open. But what was funny is there were other things in there, like cheese and, anyway, just odds and ends.
Candy,
there was chocolate bars. And he went through it all. The peaches were in the back. He went through everything. It was making a conscious decision what he wanted.
Just a great story. Janelle.
Perhaps it was not a first time that he had engaged in that behavior.
Probably not.
Well, my question has to do with what you liked best. What did you think was the high point? Was it the beautiful scenery?
Well, we really do love beaches, and we've been to lots of beautiful beaches all over the world, and there's no question that swimming in the Indian Ocean was just fantastic. But I think that the most important thing about South Africa are those national parks and those animals. And we'll see in the next show, we'll see the photos of the animals. And it's just an awesome experience to be driving in a car and have to stop because an entire herd of elephants need that road because it's their natural path to get to the river. So, I mean, you just can't top an experience like that.
Now, you mentioned the beautiful beaches, but that isn't the whole country, isn't
No.
beach, of course. So what's the inland area more like?
Agricultural, for the most part. Although there is one part in the center, kind of off to the west, which I think I mentioned earlier, that we chose not to drive through from Johannesburg to Cape Town because it's really quite dismal. It's just a rocky, barren area that has nothing to offer. And it was going to be a 2-day drive. So that's why we chose to fly, because we were thinking that we didn't want to have to spend that much time and perhaps miss out on things that were a lot better.
And do you drive on the right-hand or left-hand side of the road?
It's the opposite, just like England or Australia. Mm-hmm.
Except when you're trying to pass some animals, you might have to cross over.
Yes.
But when the animals, generally, you just have to stop and back up.
They have the right of way.
They do.
Erna Reinhardt.
This is a question I'm dying to ask, so I hope you welcome it. But share with us a few of the treasures that you brought home.
Well, I have some Zulu beads. We have some beautiful hand-carved wooden masks and some hand-woven baskets.
And where did you get each of those things?
All just off and on everywhere. And ostrich feather dusters that really work.
Oh my God.
they were awesome. There are ostrich farms everywhere, and the local people take the feathers and make dusters, and they really use them. And the amazing thing to me, I think, because they're natural feathers and not synthetic, they really pick up the dust. I went, these things, it's like we bought like 6 of these things to bring home for souvenirs for other people, and I have one at my house, and I have lots of bookcases in my house, and those things are just impossible to dust.
They just spread the dust.
It just smears around, exactly. Yeah. These things actually take the dust off, and I went, and we paid like $3 a piece for these things.
Oh, that's great. That is great.
But the masks are the hand-carved Zulu masks. And none of these things are expensive.
Right. Wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is, in addition to what you're talking about, in agriculture and all, you also stayed at some really nice hotels. Mm-hmm. It wasn't all bed and breakfast
mm-hmm.
or even out at the parks. Give us a little bit more about some of the menus that at a really nice dinner at a hotel, what the menu would be like.
Well, you see, because this country is so surrounded by water, there's lots of fishing and lots of fishing villages. So you see a lot of various kinds of fish and shellfish on menus. I mean, just a lot. But there's also cattle ranching. Mm-hmm. So the interesting thing is it's not that much different than you would see here, because you have all of the beef you have. And then, of course, in some of the areas where the ostrich farms are very prevalent, you see the ostrich on the menu as well.
On that note, we have to bring the program to conclusion. And you have such energy and such enthusiasm, and it's been an absolutely delightful show, and it's excited our viewers, I'm sure, about travel. But the good news is to those of you who are watching that Lorraine Landwehr will be back next week, and that's really exciting for you who love the outdoors and nature. And we'll show a lot of animals that, as she and her husband went through the parks. We hope you will join us again when we will do part 2 of Travels Through Southern Africa with our guest, Lorraine Landwehr. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to also invite you to make suggestions from time to time of the kind of topics you would like to see on this program. Until next week, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running in-house college production on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station.